Hi, this is Dave Castle with another installment of the Roxy video tutorial series. If you've used Roxy before, you're probably familiar with the Roxy deployer. That's the part of Roxy that lets us set up databases and app servers and so on. Today we're going to talk about the unit test framework. This is going to let us write unit tests for any xQuery code that we have in library modules. We can use this framework whether we're dealing with a MarkLogic application that is written fully in xQuery, or if we're using the REST API and we want to test out some extensions or transforms. As long as it's xQuery, we can use this framework to test it. Let's take a look at how it works.
Okay, so we're going to start off by creating a sample project to work with. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is jump into my build properties here. I'm going to set the ports to something that I know is available on my particular install. And then I'm going to scroll up a little bit. There's a section here in build properties for unit testing. You might have just skipped over it a number of times, but here it is. So I'm going to uncomment a couple of things here. In particular, we've got now a content database for testing and a modules database for testing. And by specifying those, now during the bootstrap process, it's going to create those databases. Likewise, by specifying a test port, that tells bootstrapping to create an application server that we'll use for unit testing. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, and now if we switch over to MarkLogic, we'll see that we've got an MVC test HTTP application, but there's also one with -test. I guess this wasn't a very clever name. In any case, we've got this separate application server that we're going to use for testing. And note that we've got a separate content database as well, and that means that we don't have to worry about the contents of the database in our unit testing messing up the contents of the database for our actual application. Okay, so next thing I'll do is we're going to do the typical deploy modules. And in doing that, note that we deployed all the modules to the modules database. That includes deploying the unit testing framework. So looking here, our unit testing application server is on port 8032. So I'm going to go to 8032/test. Here's the graphical user interface that Roxy provides. You'll notice that there's a set of suites already in here. For MVC applications or for hybrid applications, there's a set of tests that goes through the stuff provided by those applications themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and run those tests. All right. Now, we got a whole bunch of passes, but we've got some red up here with the CPF. Now, this one actually did fail. It ought to be showing that, but the reason that failed is that the CPF test is using a feature that's not supported on Mac. I'm running on a Mac, therefore it's not working. So we'll just let that one slide. But if we take a look at the arrows here, we can see that we can look at the details of each one of these tests. Just for kicks, let's go into one of these. We'll see under the source directory, there's a test directory, and then suites. And I'm going to go under pagelib, and I'm going to just make something fail, just for fun. So instead of assert equal, I'm going to say assert not equal. And I'm going to deploy modules again. I'll run my unit tests. Closing up this group, opening up pagelib, and we can see that here's the test that failed. We see the values that it's comparing. We see that this is an assertion not equal. And in the call stack, we'll see this is the suite, the test suite that we're executing. here's a particular file, here's a particular line. We can flip back to the code and look at line 162, and sure enough, that's the one we changed. So that leads us right back to the code to where the problem is. Call stack is pretty useful for digging into why our tests are failing. Okay, so we can also be selective about what tests we want to run. Here I'm going to set it up to run just that one unit test. And I'm going to fix it. Deploy the code again. And we'll run. Runs just that one test, it passed, and we're all set. So we have the choice of running any or all of our tests at any given time. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear out this application. This is the MVC test. I'm going to set up a new application that's a Roxy REST style application. And we're going to build an extension with a library module that supports it, and we'll build some tests on that. Okay, so I set up a new application, and this one is using Roxy's app type REST. And I've set the ports to work with some available ones. I've uncommented the test properties. And then I went ahead and bootstrapped and did a deploy modules. So we can see we've got the example application servers, separate content and content test databases along with their forests and so on. Now, within this application, we don't normally have any content in the source directory initially. For a REST application, it's assumed you're going to provide that yourself, which is different from MVC or hybrid applications. So here I've done one thing, which is I've copied in a module that I wrote some time ago, and I'm going to use this as an example of writing unit tests for a library module. Now, one way to go about this, if you use the test-driven development practice, is as you start writing your library module, before you actually do the implementation of the functions, write the tests. The motivation for that is that by writing the tests first, that kind of forces you to think through the functionality in terms of what should the results be? Where do we want to end up? And then, having written a set of tests, you then write the code to pass those tests. That's not what I'm going to do here. Instead, I'm taking an existing module and writing tests for it to verify that it works. Now, another challenge with the REST application type, as mentioned, because it doesn't have any code under the source directory, that includes not having the unit test framework. For now, the thing to do is just get a copy of the full Roxy application, just clone the whole thing onto your hard drive, and copy the source test directory on. So here we go. Copy. There we go. Let's take a quick look at what we have. The CSS, image, JavaScript directories, along with the default.xqi file, those provide the user interface that we took a look at earlier. The rest of the files are more core to what we're actually doing. So the test config, a little bit of configuration as you might guess. Test helper is the part that actually implements the testing. So if we go in here and search for helper assert, you're going to see a whole bunch of functions in here that are the different things we can assert in our unit tests. The suites directory lists out all the different test suites that we have. So the way I like to think about it is a test suite corresponds to a library module. One test within that suite corresponds to a function within that library module. Now, all these test suites here actually relate to things in MVC applications or hybrid applications. So I'm actually going to remove them. They're not going to do us any good here. Instead, I'm going to create a new suite called CSVlib. Note that I'm creating the name to be the same as the library module that I'm going to test. It's not strictly required to do it that way. It's just I find it helpful to keep track of things. Now within CSVlib, I could choose to do the testing at a variety of levels. I'm going to go ahead and test at the high level. This is the entrance level function for this functionality, and I'm going to write my unit test there. I could also write tests going down to the more specific, the lower level functions within this. But for now, I'm just going to do this one. So since I want to test the convert function, I'm going to go into the CSVlib test suite. I'm going to create a new file called convert.xqi. So this is a common practice for me. I'll name the file after the function that I'm testing within a suite, which consists of a directory named after the library that I'm testing. Now, for a test, there are a couple things you're going to want to import. The first one is the test helper module. We're going to need that in order to get our assertion functions. And I actually prefer to call this test rather than helper. The other thing we'll need is to import the module that we actually want to test. Okay, now we've got the pieces available that we need to start, except that we're really also going to need some data. Now the purpose of this library is to let you take a line of CSV text, a comma separated value, and apply it to an XML template. Now, your first thought might be that, hey, MarkLogic Content Pump, MLCP, does a really nice job of ingesting CSV already, and that's true. The only downside to it really is that it gives you a very flat XML file. Suppose that you wanted to have a file with a bit more hierarchy or structure in it. You could use a library like this one and get that structure. So within this template here, I've got a bunch of attributes saying which field within the CSV should go into that element. And here's an example line of CSV. So that's going to get mapped onto this template, and we'll get some interesting looking at some XML. So what I'm going to do is within the test suite, I'm going to create a directory called test data. I should point out that this name is actually significant. The unit test framework pays attention to that name. There are a couple different things that it pays attention to, really, I should say. So within the unit test framework, it's going to look for files called suite setup.xqi, setup.xqi, teardown.xqi, and suite teardown.xqi. This file is going to run once as the test suite is initialized. The setup.xqi would run once for each individual test. So if I've got convert.xqi, that's one test. If I set up multiple ones, then setup.xqi would run once for each of those. Likewise, teardown, which is going to do some cleanup after your testing, is going to run once for each test, and suite teardown.xqi is going to run once when the whole suite has finished. The test framework will also notice a directory called test data, and we'll show why in a minute, but it will ignore any other directory under your test suite. Any other file within your test suite is assumed to be a test, such as convert here. Okay, so I've created a test data directory, and I'm going to move my two sample data files under there. Okay, so here we go. Now in here, I'm going to create a suite setup. And I'm going to grab the test module, because that'll help me out here. There's a helper function in here called load test file. that will grab files out of your test data directory and put them into your test content database for you. So we need the file name. So first we're going to load team.xml. And then we need the database ID and the URI. And it doesn't really matter where this is, we'll just put it there. There we go. So our suite setup should now be all ready. And likewise, we're going to do a teardown. Just to explicitly delete those two files. These files are being saved in and then removed from the test content database. So this will not touch your regular application database, the regular content database. Okay, so I've got my setup and teardown. They're going to load in a template and a line of CSV. So now I'm ready to actually write a test here. What I'm going to do, I usually call the results of calling the function the actual. CSV, and what's it called? Convert. And convert expects to get a line of CSV and a template. Of course, it doesn't want the document node, it wants the root node, the element, so we're going to give it that. And from there, we're going to return something. What I typically do here is start doing the assertions. So let's start with a simple one. Let's start with, I'm going to expect the place to match up with this, this first string. Test assert equal, and the expected values come first. So place. You're going to want to make sure that the two types here agree, and we can do that one of two ways. We can either do place. We can make an element out of the thing that we're looking to get, or we can convert the element that we actually got into something else. I often actually like to do it this way because I'm doing less of a conversion on the actual response from the function I'm testing. So I figure that's a little more true to what's actually being done by the library. All right, now let's see if I did this right. Example test is on 8032. I've got my one test in here. No test run. All right, so that does happen sometimes, and in fact, it typically means that I broke something. So let's take a look at what it was. Okay, so I've got an invalid conversion, get test file. So that's in my suite setup, and it's not finding team.xml. Oh, brother. Okay. Okay. So, hooray, my test passed. A good practice actually in unit testing, I talked a little bit about test-driven development before, and one of the nice things about the approach is that you start off deliberately with a failure, and then you fix something so that the test now passes. And it's that conversion from failure to test that tells you you've done something that made a difference and it worked. I'm not doing that here again, but if I wanted to just kind of verify that, hey, is this actually testing anything? I can deliberately just make it fail just to, yeah, okay, I've got Philadelphia and Philadelphia, so that works. So now that I've convinced that I'm doing it right, I can go ahead and add some more of these. Now, one of the now this opened bit here is interesting because you notice that I'm calling an action on that one. Action is this reformat date function. Now I can test that directly by making a new test to handle that. In fact, that would probably be a good idea. But I'm feeling a little bit lazy right now, and I'm going to go ahead and test it this way, right in this place. So that's the way the date looks in the CSV, but that is how we want it to look when we get into xquery land, because that's how the index is expected to be formatted. So let's go with that one and see if it's working. All right, now that failed. So let's take a look at that. So we're actually getting an empty sequence here in the actual. And why is that? Okay, the reason is actually because I neglected one layer. So let's do this. I'm going to paste that in there. Run it again, and it passes. Fantastic. And you can see here I've got 2 tests pass, 2 tests run. In fact, what's being counted here, this is the number of tests, as in how many files you have here that correspond to being tests. The run and pass numbers correspond to how many assertions you have. So the more of those, the better. For a library like this, it would be a good practice to take, let's see, where's that function? Here's the reformat date. You can see I'm using some funky regular expressions in here, so it would be great to set that up as a separate test on its own and be able to run through several dates, several different formats, and make sure it's handling some edge cases. I'm going to pause for a moment while I whip up some examples of that just to show what that looks like together. So stand by. All right, here we are again. I've created a new file called reformat date and added a couple different assertions. Note that I'm looking for some edge cases, so I want to make sure that single-digit month and days are handled correctly. Let's see. Oh wait, actually that one's backwards. Ha. So that's the expected value, and this is one of the input formats, just a straight set of 8 digits that we can handle. So let's go ahead and deploy those again. Now, because I've added a new test, I'm going to refresh this page, and we'll see we now have 2 different tests. And let's see. Oop, I didn't do one right. So this is good to see too. So this is showing the line in the actual module. Here's the line in the test, it's line 7. Oh, I see. Okay, so it's expecting when we look, oh, this looks like a case of bad test writing. Yeah, so when we look at this bit here in the original library, it's expecting an element to be passed in. So that's a case where it would have been smarter for me to specify an as parameter. All right, so what do we have now? Our expected value is a string. The actual date coming back is an element. This is what I get for not looking at my old code for a while. Okay, yeah, so what's being returned is in fact an element, and so that's how I should have set up my test. And this is a fine example of how or why when you're using a library, when you're writing a library that's going to get reused, it's good practice to set up those as parameters, even though xquery does not require them. Makes it easier for yourself later on. Here we go. Okay, so now my tests are passing. They work correctly. If I wanted to add a new format to this, one simple way to do it would be to add more tests, and then I could go work on the code, knowing that if I messed up and broke the old formats, I'd have a way of noticing that quickly. Okay, so what we've done so far is taken a look at straight up unit testing where we're seeing we've got a simple function, we're going to pass something in, get something back out, and take a look at the results. Some tests are a little more complicated than that, though, because we're really looking at side effects. After all, MarkLogic is a database. We're sometimes going to want to do some tests that involve transactions. We can do that. Let's take an example of that. I'm going to, let's see, I don't think there's anything in here in this library that actually would do anything transactionally. I'm going to just do one of those myself. I'm going to add something here. Let's suppose that we do a declare function CSV insert CSV. And how about this? Let's do collections. So we've got a function where we're going to pass in the result of calling convert, and we're going to store that somewhere, and we're going to add some collections to it. Now I'm going to also add a URI parameter here. Now, one of the things you want to think about when you're writing your code is how you can separate things out to be independently testable. I could have something written such that I've got a function that is going to do some processing, do some transformation, and then insert something into the database. That's a whole lot of stuff to test all at once. What I've looked at so far with writing these tests, I'm just dealing with xQuery library modules. It's worth a quick aside before we get into this insert CSV test. Let's think about REST extensions for a moment. There, I just created a REST extension, and in here, of course, I've got my get and put and post and delete functions. Something useful to notice, this is itself a library module. So once this has been deployed to MarkLogic, I can actually load this into an xQuery test, with my unit test framework. I can load in this library module and run my tests on it. The thing that makes that a little bit tricky is the way that it gets deployed, right? Because it's not going to show up as foo.xqy in the same place every time. It's going to be deployed as slash the name of the group it's in, slash the name of the app server, slash some other stuff, and eventually it'll be like extension.xqy or something like that. So what I prefer to do is have my REST extensions import a library module, add the bulk of my logic in a library module, and then write unit tests on that. So I'm keeping my REST extensions really thin wherever I can. Okay, so let's get back to our CSV lib, and I want to do something that's going to insert a CSV document at a particular URI. This will be the result of my convert function, let's say, and I want to specify some collections. So I'm going to go back to my test suite, got a new file. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually call the function. So I need to pass, let's see, insert CSV. I'm going to give it a URI. I'm going to give it an element. And for this test, I'm not really interested or worried about what's in the element, so I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm going to give it a couple of collections. There we go. Okay, so what you might think at this stage is I can now do some kind of a test, assert something or other, and make sure that the document exists in the place where I expect it to, and that it has the collections that I've given it. Now, the thing to remember, of course, is transactionally speaking, we're still in the same transaction, so I'm not going to see the result of that change. I can throw a semicolon in here, and by doing so, I'm now saying everything above the semicolon, that's one transaction, do the insert, finish that, and then come back and do some new things. So what I'm actually going to do, I don't actually need the test import for the first one, so I'm just going to come down and do it like this. Let's make sure that the document was actually put in where I said it should be put. And the second thing I want to check is that the collections are actually what I expected them to be. Now, in the other tests I wrote, I used assert equal. Here I'm using assert true. There's actually quite a few different assertion functions available. And one of them is, this one here. Assert same values. So this one expects to take two sequences of values, and it's going to verify that they have the same values in them, but not worry about the order. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, here are the collections that I expect this thing to have, and then let's find out what documents this document actually has. What collections this document actually has. All right, let's give that a whirl. Now, we know that this test is not going to pass because we haven't implemented the function yet. That's okay. I've now got 3 tests. One of them fails as expected, so no problem. Let's get on with that. What we're going to do is xdmp document insert. I think permissions is next. And then the collections. Okay, so in the test suite, line 13, that's where something's going wrong. Doesn't like this one. Doc available is not working out. Oh, you know what? Test 1, test. There we go. That'll do it. And now they all pass. Fantastic. So there's an example of a multi-transaction test. Now, because I'm doing an insert here, it would also be a good practice to go into my teardown and get rid of that document. Uh, that way I can make sure that it's not going to interfere with any future tests. But yeah, so we've got here an example of a multi-transaction test, and you can see that by thinking about the parameters that I'm passing in, I'm making sure that I can actually write a test that will cover this. For instance, I need to know what this URI is. Um, so I'm making sure that's something I'm passing in. Yeah, at some point I'm going to have to generate that, but by passing it in, I can write a test where the test knows where to look for the document. So this was an introduction to the Roxy unit test framework. Um, I invite you to try it out on your projects and keep an eye out for updates on it. Like I said, I'm intending at some point to make it so that when you do ML new, you'll get this test suite even with the REST style applications. That's all for now. Have a good one.